Paige Omartian, and you're watching Coffee with Paige. So grab your coffee or tea and get settled in, because I want to introduce you to our wonderful guest for today, Ken Abraham. Ken, it is a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thanks, Paige. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Okay, well, we have a New York Times best-selling author in our presence right now. He has written so many books, not only of his own, but he's written with so many renowned people, writing their stories with them, writing books with them, like Joel Osteen, Dave Ramsey, Billy Graham, Chuck Norris. It just goes on and on. I'm kind of blown away by just the books that you've written, the people that you've worked with. But really, you found a really fascinating niche in writing these books with people who've been through either, historical events or major tragedies or whatever the story is. How do you deal with, for instance, I'm thinking about Lisa Beamer, whose husband was the 9/11 hero in that plane crash that went down, and his famous last words, "Let's roll."
Right.
How was an experience like that, working with her in the midst of such a tragic circumstance?
Lisa didn't really want to write a book, but she knew that the world was interested in the story and somebody was going to write the book. And so she said, if it's going to be done, I'd rather do it myself and have a little bit of control about the thing. And so we got together literally in Todd's office, and everything was just exactly the way it was on 9/11 whenever he got on that plane to go to San Francisco and never made it, of course. So we were literally working in his office with all of his paraphernalia. He was a big Chicago Bulls fan. He had Michael Jackson on the wall, or Michael not Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan on the wall. Big posters of Michael Jordan, that sort of thing. Just a basketball fan, great guy. And so his presence was there with us. And the only thing that Lisa changed was she took the pictures off the wall and put them down low so her children could see their daddy. So it was just a real tender time working with her. But at the same time, I felt almost like a meanie, because I was taking a knife and scraping over wounds that hadn't even had a chance to heal yet. And yet it needed to be done. And Lisa was so willing to do it. And when the book came out, the world received it so well. And so many people have read that book and have been inspired by it. Let's roll. Great story. Just a great lady. So
how did you get into this niche? I mean, you gave me a while ago some of the books that you wrote early on that were just yours, but how did you get into the niche of writing with other people and writing their stories? That is something that not many people can do, and you are known as the best person for that. So how did you get into that?
Because I totally failed at writing my own books. That's the real reason. I wrote 9 books of my own first, and I loved writing. I first started writing out for kids. I wrote a book about love, sex, dating, being single, how to find the right person to be in love with, that sort of thing. The book was called "Don't Bite the Apple Till You Check for Worms," and it was great. And we did sell. We sold a whole bunch of those books, but they sold like for $5.95. That's not that kind of thing. And I did 9 of those kind of books, and I finally got to the place I said, God, I don't know if I can make a living at this thing, And so I came to the place where I said, Lord, I'm going to go to this book convention, and if I don't come back with some new work, I'm going to have to move back to Pennsylvania, where I grew up, and get a real job, because this writing thing just isn't working. And so I went to the book convention, and I came back, Paige, with 9 book projects.
Wow.
That was the good news. I had 9 book projects. The bad news was I had 9 deadlines. Yeah, you know how that works.
Yes.
But one of those books was with a professional baseball player by the name of Gary Carter, and he's a Hall of Fame baseball player now. I just passed away last year. Great guy, and we did a book called The Gamer. And I discovered that I really enjoy telling other people's stories more than my own. And it was fun, and I got to live vicariously through some great people, still do, and I learn from every person with whom I work. So it's just a wonderful way to make a living.
That's fascinating, and so often God does that. We go down one path, and because we get part of it right, we're like, well, I'm doing this, Lord, because I thought you said this, and then we end up sometimes at a dead end where we're like, well, Lord, what's next? Is this really what you were calling me to do? And in fact, He's really expanding what we originally thought we were called to do. It's really actually bigger. So that's really fascinating.
You're absolutely right, because I was really trying to do what I thought was the best thing. And I had a small audience, and I was actually, having some success at what I was doing. But how the Lord just expanded my horizons and gave me the opportunity to touch the world through other people's stories. So you're right. Yeah, I thought it was the end of the road, and he said, no, you haven't seen anything yet, son.
That is very encouraging for all of us when we hit that point or that season in our life.
Because we all do.
Yes.
Sooner or later.
Yes.
And maybe that's a good thing, because the Lord has to bring us to the place where we say, okay, who's really in charge here?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. That point of surrender. Like, okay, Lord, yes,
He
it's really about your dreams for me. And
but the wonderful part of that is, though, that it's not the end of the road. It's not the end of the world. He suddenly, when he's in charge, then he just opens up things in a fresh way, and he gives us favor, and he's able to use our lives in ways we never dreamed possible before, and to have an influence in the world that maybe we'll only know in eternity, perhaps.
That's so true, and you're a perfect testimony of that.
Thank you.
Well, I want to talk about this new book that you've written, Set Free, and this I've been reading, and it is gripping. It just is a page turner. I could hardly almost go to sleep last night.
It's a scary story too, in some ways.
It is. Well, could you, just share a little bit about this story with our audience and just summarize it, and then we'll talk a little bit further.
Gail Owens was a woman who lived in Memphis, quintessential Christian lady, sang in the church choir, lovely lady. Everybody thought she was just a wonderful person. In the meantime, she was embezzling money from the person that she worked with. Her husband was having an affair. Just a lot of things were going on below the surface of this family. She started going downtown Memphis, cruising down through Beale Street and some of the other more sleazy sections of Memphis, quite frankly, looking for somebody that she could hire to murder her husband. And she eventually found somebody that took her up on her offer. And so she hired this guy to murder her husband. They never even exchanged money, but he actually did the deed. And they came home from church one night, after church, after choir practice, and the husband coached the church basketball team. They came home that night, and 12-year-old Stephen is the fellow with whom I wrote the book. He's now 47 years of age. But 12-year-old Stephen walked in the house that night and found his dad bludgeoned on the floor in the den, his head bleeding, just about dying, gasping for breath. So his dad went to the hospital that night, died that night. A few days later, the police came and picked up his mother, Gail Owens, because they had tapped the phone and they found out that she was the one who had actually hired somebody to murder Stephen's dad. Wow. For the next 20-some years, Stephen would not have anything to do with his mom, Gail Owens. She went to prison. She was convicted of murder, and so was the person who actually did the crime. And she would have been the first woman in more than 180 years to be executed in the state of Tennessee. She was on death row. She was the only person on death row in the prison here in Nashville, Tennessee. The only woman. And really, God began to work in her life in prison. And you hear all these prison conversions and that sort of thing, but she was a genuine conversion and really came to know the Lord in a real way, not just a churchy kind of way, but in a real way. And she came to know the Lord. And so she was, helping to serve in the prison. But her son hated her. He testified against her in a capital case that she should be executed. And the last time he saw his mom was when he walked out of the courtroom, and she looked at him and gazed at him as he's leaving the room after he had testified against his mom that she should die. Wow. So for the next 20-some years, they didn't have any communication. He hated her, and yet God was setting him up through one thing after another, bringing him, first of all, to Nashville, Tennessee. His mom was in prison here in Nashville. God brought Stephen from Memphis to Nashville. He couldn't find a job. The only place he could find a job was teaching in prison.
Oh, how ironic.
That's the only place he could get a job was teaching in prison.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So he eventually did get a job teaching in one of the Christian schools here in Nashville. And the first week on the job, he had to give a little testimony to some of the freshman Bible class group. And so he told his story about his mom and his dad. He lost his mom and his dad in the same event, because his dad died and mom went to prison. So he tells his story, and at the end of his story, a guy comes up to him and he said, "You're Stephen Owens?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm Steve Wilson. For the last 15 years, I've been going to the prison to minister to your mom."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so God was just setting him up through all these different circumstances that he knew he had to go back and see his mom. They had no communication, but through some events, it took some time, took a period of years, when he finally walked into the prison after 20-some years and saw his mother for the first time. And they spent about 3 hours with each other, and they hugged, they cried, but more importantly, they forgave each other.
Wow.
Where he told his mom, I forgive you. She asked for his forgiveness. And they really just were reconciled after all these years. Paige, God can do that. Some people say, man, your sin is too bad. Your crime is too bad.
Yeah.
There's nobody beyond the grace of God.
It's so true.
And that's what happened in their story. And so God brought them back together as a family, but she's still going to die. She's still on death row. She's going to, there's a date set now where she's going to die. And so some people in Nashville began to rally around John Sigenthaler, who was a founder of the USA Today newspaper, one of the founders. Jeff Fisher was a coach of the Tennessee Titans here for a long, long time. A lot of the music people here in Nashville began to go to bat for this woman, Gail Owens, and say, you know what? She should not die. She's a good woman. Yeah, she did something horribly wrong, but she should not be executed. And there were mitigating circumstances that she never took the stand in her own defense. The jury never heard about her husband running around on her, never heard about the sexual abuse or other abuse in the relationship. All of that was hidden and didn't come to light until we wrote this book. And so eventually, just to bring it real tight, Governor Bredesen took the advice and looked into the case and decided that there was enough merit to commute her sentence to life in prison. That was great news right there. But then the first time she came up for parole, the parole board let her out. And so now she's out helping other women who've gone through abusive situations, women who are in prison. She's out serving. She works with a group called Thistle Farms, where they just minister to women all around the area, and is having an impact. God takes what the devil meant for evil, and he turns it around, and he uses it for good if we'll let him.
He does. This story is absolute proof of this.
It really is.
Wow. It kind of takes your breath away, all of what happened. And I love I don't know, the metaphor of it all, really, and how the forgiveness of how, God took her son who was so angry and was so bitter.
Yes.
And God was really chasing after both of them, saying, okay, I've forgiven you, and I've forgiven you for not forgiving your mom.
Exactly.
But I'm chasing after both of you because I have a bigger plan.
You're so right. And the point, we call it set free because the point was they both needed to be set free. Yes. Gail needed to be set free from prison, but Stephen needed to be set free from that resentment and that bitterness. And really, the truth is, we've all gone through some tough times. We all carry a heavy load. Somebody said, be kind to everybody you meet because everybody you know is carrying a heavy load. And we are. And a lot of folks have been hurt and things have happened in our lives. And you can carry around resentment, and bitterness if you allow yourself. But boy, it doesn't do you any good. It just eats away at you.
Eats you up.
So they both needed to be set free.
That's so
and they
true.
Were.
Yes. Wow, that is an amazing story. Well, what did you walk away with, I guess, as you were writing this story and in the midst of both of their lives and hearing from them and what they were going through? What did you really walk away with as this book was finished writing?
I think two things. One, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
So true.
Here's this little lady, little Pentecostal holiness lady, gray hair. You say she would never hurt a fly. And yet she did this horrible thing. She hired somebody to murder her husband, and he did. So you say, there's nothing that we wouldn't do outside the grace of God. But on the other hand, the grace of God is so powerful, and the goodness of God, he loves us so much. If we will just turn to him, he can change things. He can forgive us and bring us back and restore our lives. And I think that's what I saw. One of the best pictures I saw was Gail whenever she saw her grandchildren for the first time. She'd never seen her grandchildren. She'd never met her grandchildren. She'd been in prison. And so when she sees her grandchildren for the first time, you say, wow, God doesn't give up on any of us. There's a whole new life here that they're going to have, and life in heaven as well. So.
That's so encouraging and beautiful.
Thanks.
Beautiful. Well, and I want to talk about just, as we close here, just, when you write books, you're so often in the midst of writing so many stories and books with other people. But when you sit down to write a book, what are the things that you're passionate about writing and sharing?
I look for a story that's going to touch the world, that has the potential to reach people that I see in the mall or in a restaurant or Starbucks. What are these people looking for? And I find that they're looking for hope. That's why I took the book with Joel Osteen. I said, man, he's talking about hope. He's talking about exactly what people need. Yes. But that's one of the things I look for. The other thing is, a lot of the stories that come to me have tragedy involved because we all go through hurtful times. Lisa Beamer's story. I wrote a book with Payne Stewart's wife, a professional golfer who was in a plane crash. This story has certainly some tragedy to it. But I look for those elements because we all hurt in some way, and the Lord wants to heal us of those hurts. Not just take away the pain, but take away the residual, the ramifications of all that in our lives. And really, so I look for those kinds of things. And part of what I do is I'm a little bit of a friend to the people I work with. I learn things about them that perhaps they've never told anybody else. I'm a little bit of a counselor sometimes, sometimes even a little bit of a pastor. And I've discovered that if I do all of those things well, maybe I'll have the chance to put the nouns and the verbs in the right order. That's what my work is about.
That's awesome. Well, you have such a fascinating work that God has brought you to, and the impact that God is using you to have over the world is just truly remarkable. And thank you so much for just being here and sharing a little glimpse into your life and your work with us.
Oh, thank you, Paige. And I'm excited for you, the books you're writing and everything else you're doing. Great.
Well, congratulations. I appreciate it. And you're quite inspiring to me as a writer. When I read your books, I'm like, wow.
Thank you, Paige.
Well, and if you would like to get some of Ken's books and learn more about him, he's got a website that you can go to, and that is kenabrahambooks.com. So I hope you'll check that out, and I guarantee you can pick up a handful of those books and be inspired by those stories.
Please do.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next Tuesday on the next Coffee with Paige.